Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting for June 9, 2020. The first order in the agenda is to call to the order of the meeting. So we have quorum. Next in our agenda is approval of the minutes from the May 26, 2020 Finance meeting. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve?
Oh, no. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays, the motion carries. Next in our agenda is public appearances for non-agenda items. It seems that we don't have anyone here for that, so next is Finance Director report. So we have a couple of reports that Misty is going to discuss with us tonight. First is the COVID financial impact report, and then a couple of treasury reports. So Misty.
Thank you, Julia. So included in your packet, I'll start with the COVID report. So this is basically an updated version of the report I provided about a month ago. This report is through May 31st of 2020. And a big thing to keep in mind here is this still is an interim report. So we're still gathering information. All of the money that we've spent has not necessarily made it through to our accounting records yet. So some of the expenses might be lower than what they actually are if you consider what we've truly purchased as of now. The stuff in here is just what's hit the GL or the accounting records at this point. So the first section is kind of the acronyms, just to be there. I did go through, and anytime there was no changes, I put no changes at the heading, or if it was updated, I added that too, so you could kind of focus a little bit more about what is different since the last one that I sent out. Since we didn't talk about it at the Finance Committee level, though, I thought I'd go through just a little bit more detail about each one of those sections, and if you have questions, obviously, jump in and let me know what you want me to add on to. So the first main section is all the different emergency paid sick leave and related type policies that the city implemented since the time of this public emergency started. The first one is the interim policy. So the FFCRA, or the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, required that we provide additional sick leave to employees. But that didn't start until later. So there was a period of time from the middle of March when this really kind of started becoming a thing at the city until March 30th. There was this interim period. And so the council at the time had approved an interim policy for paid sick leave. The purpose of this was really because if we had employees that either were possibly infected or had symptoms or had a family member that had symptoms or was infected, we really didn't want them at the office, possibly infecting the rest of our workforce. So we wanted to provide some additional leave for people to make sure that they were covered and could take that time away, protect themselves, their families, as well as the rest of the city employees. So this policy is actually over now. That was just the interim time between when this started and when that new FFCRA kicked in. So in total, there was about 365 hours of leave was used in just those 4 departments that you can see there, for a total cost of about $12,000. The important thing to keep in mind, though, and this will be a theme throughout the report, is just because there's a cost to the city to provide something or to purchase something does not necessarily mean that there was a budget impact. So in the police department, this is a great example here. There's 115 hours of time used, but we only actually backfilled, meaning that we had to pay somebody else overtime to take over the duties of that person while they were out on this leave. We only had to backfill 13 hours. So that really and truly is a budgetary cost to us for about $1,000. But the cost to us was also $12,000. So that's why sometimes people will say, what is COVID costing us at this point? And it depends. It depends on what you're looking at and kind of what the context is of the question. So that interim policy is over. Then the city also implemented the emergency paid sick leave that was required under the Families First Coronavirus Act. So there were 2 areas where the city authorized benefits that were a little more than what was required under the law. The first being that we would pay 100% instead of 2/3 for caring for a family member that had COVID. And then we also were allowing employees to tap into their 2020 future sick leave in case they ran out of the other leave before it was actually earned. That all of these things were approved by resolution, and I included those resolution numbers in there if you wanted a little bit more background on what those things were. So we, through the end of May, had 16 hours that were paid under this policy for a cost of about $600. So it's a nice benefit to be there, but luckily we haven't had to have employees use it that much. Also, under the law, we were required to expand FMLA to allow for employees that had childcare responsibilities due to school closures or daycare closures, things like that. We do have one employee that's currently using some interim leave for that for 24 hours and a cost of about $475. But not a lot of people are tapping into that at this point either. The other nuance with the FFCRA is that we were allowed to, as a city, exempt our emergency responders, which we did. So the emergency responders, which includes, in general, IT, police, fire, public works, are not allowed to use the FFCRA programs, but we did provide a separate bank of emergency paid leave for those emergency responders, which was done via separate resolution. So there are 95 categories or 95 employees that are categorized in that group of emergency responders, and we had 88 hours paid under that policy for a cost of about $2,500. So all in all, not too much utilization of those policies. Doesn't mean they're not needed, but it's nice to know that we haven't had to use them that much. Also, at that meeting in March, the council adopted some emergency financial procedures that basically streamlined some processes so that we could really be responsive and flexible to address the emergency. And part of the requirements of getting that approved was that I would report back to you guys saying what different things were done under those alternate procedures. So the first one is the council approved a budget amendment using $250,000 of our fund balance in order to address additional expenses needed for the public emergency. So we had quite a bit of a lengthy conversation with this one. Generally, you wouldn't want to tap into your fund balance for stuff, but this is why we have a fund balance. You know, having a national pandemic and a national state of emergency is not a normal thing. And that's a great example of why we have our fund balance there and why we make good choices throughout the years so that when we get to a year like this that is very unusual and has a lot of unique financial circumstances, that we don't have to panic because we've made great choices up until then and we have a pretty good safety net there. So we are dipping or have authority to dip into our safety net by the $250,000. These are the items that we have identified so far as using that funding. I'll say there are other things that the city is doing to address COVID specifically, but the departments have been able to absorb that within their budgets instead. So, for example, in the police department, they bought masks and hand sanitizer and stuff like that too. In general, they've been able to absorb that within their operating budget, so they haven't needed to do a budget amendment to use this particular funding. So this is kind of the bigger stuff that's just not able to be absorbed.
Misty, I have a question.
Yeah.
Why do we have the labor attorney for $25,000 there? For what? What was the emergency?
So we use the labor attorney a lot, especially in the beginning, and we're continuing to use them now. With all of that FFCRA stuff, as we were implementing it, we had to make sure that everything that we were implementing was in compliance, not only with FFCRA, but also with our union contracts and other different employment law requirements that we have. They reviewed all of those policies we talked about above, and then later on we'll talk about an alternate schedule in the police department that the labor attorney got involved in, that type of thing. My guess is we won't hit that $25,000 number by any means, but we wanted to have some money kind of set aside in case something happened and we needed to get the labor attorney involved.
And I have another question. So this election, additional supply and staff are for the election that already, the past election, or we're thinking about August primary?
Both. So there was a pretty significant cost with the last election. As I'm sure you're all aware, the absentee ballots were quite significant, and so that took a lot of additional staff time and such to do. So there was an implication for the April election that we just had. These costs here, though, would include April, August, and November, assuming that we will need additional costs for all three of those. Now, I know you guys are aware of the WEC, or the Wisconsin Elections Commission, money that is hopefully going to come our way to help offset some of this too. But until that's really a bird in the hand, we didn't want to count on that. So we're still kind of earmarking some of this money for that purpose until we know that we'll get reimbursed.
Thank you.
Yep. So then the next section is budget amendments. So in general, the resolution authorized the mayor to approve budget amendments for pretty much any dollar amount from pretty much any source, as long as I reported back to you guys. After the emergency is over, we'll do a formal budget amendment, which will have, a spreadsheet with all of the different budget amendments that are needed. You guys will approve it and we'll publish it the quote unquote right way. So far, there's only been one thing that was approved under this alternate policy or alternate procedure, and it's the same one as last month.
Okay, what happened, do we receive the council information about this? I don't remember.
Yep, so this same item was included in the last monthly report.
Okay.
And then at the end of the emergency, we'll put all of the budget amendments together and do the formal budget
So,
amendment.
and what happened with these vehicles? So they were in bad shape, they broke, and...
So it was already scheduled to be replaced.
Okay.
They budgeted for $27,500 under that budgeted cost, and it actually came in at $34,325. So in order to make up the difference, staff assumed a higher trade-in than what was budgeted we were able to get. And then they moved some money between those other two accounts, the maintenance of the wells and the maintenance of the collection system. The $2,000 in each of those accounts was moved out of there into the capital cost to help make up the difference of what that truck cost.
Okay.
So they didn't have to tap into fund balance or anything like that. They just did some internal shifting to get that to still happen. And then the last one under this section is the revised purchasing process. So anything that is not public construction and that was within budget, either as adopted or as amended as above, the mayor would be able to approve it. And how this one is set up is that the council actually gets notified before this report even happens. So in our workflow system, so we've got those pre-approvals that you guys approve every once in a while. Once the pre-approval goes through the mayor, if it is marked as something that he's doing in the emergency, after he approves it, an email will get kicked out to all of you at council as well, letting you know that he approved those. So these three things are the same as last month. The stormwater utility vegetation management is a contract that was actually used as the example when we were getting this process approved. So it's a routine purchase that we do every year. The salt, we did get some questions on this about why it was important that we push that through without going to council. And that's because we're trying to get onto the state contract. And in order to be on state contract, you had to commit really fast and really early. And it was before we knew what was happening with the council meetings and the Board of Public Works meetings and things like that. But it's the same thing that we do every year, and it is on state contract. So from a bidding perspective, we're much more protected by going on state versus doing it ourselves. And then the other one is that same one that we talked about with the budget amendment. So generally a piece of equipment that's $25,000 or more would go through council as a pre-approval, but the mayor approved this one with that budget amendment under these alternate procedures.
I have a question. For how long is that policy is going to be in place?
I think it was through the emergency. Let me pull up my...
What? Until the city. No, I think we are open here. Like it's open to public. I don't know.
Yeah. Let me get back to you for sure.
Okay,
the intention was always just through the life of the state of emergency that we have.
Because
as far as the alternate procedures.
Because the state of emergency ends May 26th.
I thought it was the 26th, and then we extended.
We extended
till July.
Mm.
Was the
okay.
memory could be.
We are matching the Dane County
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
that one, yeah,
Emergency
That one,
preparation. Yeah.
yeah, I remember now. Okay, thank you.
I'll get that exact date, though,
Okay.
sometime in July, I remember, yeah. Excellent. The expenses, though, possibly will go through the end of the year and then possibly even to the next year, depending on, of course, what happens and what the situation looks like as we continue.
What? Can you repeat again?
The expenses that we have will depend on what happens with the emergency. So if this is still around and is still a concern, we might continue to have to buy hand sanitizer and masks and stuff like that. So that might continue through the end of the year.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And possibly into next year too,
Yeah,
depending
okay.
on what happens. I wish I knew when this whole thing was going to be done, but I don't.
Okay. So,
Oh, did you have a question? Sorry.
no, I'm fine.
Okay. Another section of this report is the utility policy changes. There was no changes this month from last month, but ultimately what it is the PSC, at the time that the resolution was approved, the PSC was allowing us to do certain things like not waiving interest and penalty during the state of emergency and not disconnecting people for non-payment for water. Since we were allowed to do it, we, under our ordinance, would still need council approval generally. And the council said, no, the mayor can make those judgment calls ahead of time. I think it was the morning of the day that this resolution was approved, the PSC actually came down and required us to do these things. But it still was good to have that authority in case we did need to be more flexible as time went on. So those three things were all implemented as required. And then I heard today in the webinar that the PSC is looking at possibly ending this in the next month or two, but I haven't heard officially when those would end. So then the next section is the total cost to address the emergency. So how we're tracking this in our system is using a couple of extra codes, both in the timekeeping part for the cost of the payroll, and then also a code in our P card and our check payment systems. So this report is simply just pulling out what the total costs are on those codes. And I'll remind you again that those codes are only as good as the information that has made it to the general ledger at this point. So if somebody has charged something on their P card but hasn't coded it and it hasn't gotten approved and all of that stuff, it won't be in these numbers quite yet. But this is based on what we have in our accounting records as of the date of the report. So our vendor invoices, so this would be stuff that we're paying other people to buy. So a lot of this is going to be the voting screens that we got, pens, and for the voting, again, they had bought specific pens so that everybody had their own, hand sanitizer, wipes, that type of a thing. And we spent about $49,000 on invoices for that so far. Some of that will hopefully be eligible for FEMA reimbursement. Some of it hopefully will be eligible for CARES Act reimbursement. And most of it does have a budget impact. So not all of it. It goes back to the comment at the beginning where I said some of this stuff can get absorbed within departments' budgets, but not all of it can. So most of it will have a budget impact, but not everything.
I have a question, Misty.
Yep.
When will you know if it's impacting our budget or FEMA? Do you have any timeline on that?
So it's mostly a matter of can the departments absorb it? So departments are being very good about watching their other expenses and trying to absorb things when they can. But if you think of like the clerk's department, which has a relatively small budget and a really high amount of expenses that were as a result of COVID, they probably will not be able to absorb all of it. So we won't know 100% till the end of the year when everything is done. But I'll say departments are being very responsible, making sure that they try to reduce their other expenses to make up for some of these things.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
But I have another question. So, but I think we know if we are approaching budget time, we need to have a better idea how much it's going to be affecting. I don't know, next year, I don't know, you're planning to allocate a contingency amount for next year, in next year budget, to absorb this type of cost. In the winter, we have another wave of COVID. You know what I mean?
So in the winter, if it's December, yes, that would come out of this budget. Next year's budget, I think, is going to be pretty tough from a variety of reasons. So we probably will need to have an amount of a contingency there. But I think at this point, at least, without having all of the facts in play, I would actually lean towards doing it similar to how we did in 2020 and saying that we will use our fund balance for these unexpected COVID costs that are not eligible for reimbursement from CARES and FEMA, so that we don't have to absorb that within the other operations for the most part. And again, depending on dollar amount, I mean, there's a variety of things in play. And then back to Randy's question too about the reimbursement pieces. So FEMA reimbursement is a 75% reimbursement. So 75% of the money would come back from FEMA. The city would be responsible for 25% of it. And that's a category 2 public assistance funding. There's a lot of strings associated with it, of course, as there always is with federal money. But we are, I guess, automatically eligible to it to an extent, so that we will be able to tap into, but only for things that are not budgeted and fall within certain categories. CARES funding. So CARES is the federal funding that they gave to the state, and then they required the state to pass it on to the city. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the future of this report too. But that has a lot more restrictions, but it at least is a 100% reimbursement for things that are unbudgeted and directly as a result of COVID within certain categories. So we're still continuing to learn more about both of those programs. CARES in particular was issued last week, and the DOA, or the Department of Administration, who's administering that grant, still hasn't submitted out any of the rules as far as what it's going to be or any of the processes. So there's a lot of questions still about that funding.
Oh, thank you for clarifying, and how fun to track all of that.
Yeah. It's been interesting. So,
it's been a challenge, I'm sure.
Personnel, which is where
yes,
a lot of our costs are going to be for responding to this. So COVID tasks, regular time, we spent about 1,600 hours on COVID-related stuff, again, just through May. So if you figure this really kind of started middle of March, maybe early March, until the end of May is a month and a half, or two and a half months, so it's not a lot of time, but we spent about $71,000 on that. Very little of that is going to be reimbursed either through FEMA or through the CARES grant. A big reason because regular wages, so for me as example, I spent a lot of time learning about what the rules are and tracking stuff and all of that thing. But since you pay for me as a salary employee to be paid for an entire year anyways, and I'm budgeted, none of my regular hours will be eligible for reimbursement because I just shifted my priorities. So I spent time on that instead of being able to do other things.
Sure.
There is some of it that might be reimbursable, especially on the public safety side. So that's where we need to learn a little bit more. In particular, the time spent in the Emergency Operations Center. We might be able to get some reimbursement for that. But we'll see as we learn more. And then there'll be some budget impact, but not a lot. Overtime, 146 hours. A lot of this is in the clerk's department with the election and dealing with the absentee votes. So there is a cost to that. Some of that may be FEMA reimbursement eligible. Again, it's mostly on the police and public safety side. The election side is not eligible for FEMA. And then for CARES Act, again, some of it on the public safety side, but not really anything else will be eligible. So very little. But most of that overtime will have a budget impact. You know, the clerk's department does not budget for a lot of overtime to deal with the elections. They have a little bit in there because we do know that elections take a lot of time, but not to the amounts that we were seeing. So then the other categories are almost all of them. So the interim leave policy is the one we talked about at the top of the report. So these are final numbers. None of that is going to be eligible for FEMA reimbursement. There's a question about if some of it might be eligible for CARES. We're working with the league to get some more information on that and try to push the DOA to allow some of that to be eligible. But at this point, we're not sure. And then I'm going to skip the patrolled altered schedule, and then I'll go to the FFCRA, the next two, and then the emergency responders. Those were the ones we talked about earlier in the report. None of that's going to be FEMA reimbursement eligible because FEMA will only reimburse or overtime in general for policies that already existed when the emergency happened. So any new policy as a result of the emergency is not eligible under FEMA generally. And then maybe a little bit on the public safety side for the emergency responder piece will be eligible for CARES. And then most of it would have a adopted budget impact. So then the patrol altered schedule, if I can spend just a couple seconds talking about that one. So Chief Breckland, to his credit, was very thoughtful about how he could protect his officers from getting exposed to COVID. So they looked at their schedule and kind of the points where they interact, the different schedules and the different employees interacted with each other, and there was a lot of overlap. So he created a separate altered schedule that split the employees into groups, and then it made it very structured so that there was to really minimize the amount of overlap that the employees had. So that if there was an exposure, it would limit the amount of people that were exposed on the rest of the force. So what that meant is we ended up paying employees for hours that they were on standby in case somebody else in their group were exposed, even though they weren't actually working. So we had about 2,300 hours paid under that weren't worked, that were on standby for a pretty significant cost. None of that will be FEMA reimbursable eligible. I'm not sure about the CARES. This is the one that I'm really trying to get some good answers on. It is public safety related, so there's at least a chance that I can get some better information about getting some of that reimbursed, but I'm not sure. But there is very little budget impact because we budget to pay for the officers for a full year for their salary, whether they are working it or if they're on standby. So that's going to be a pretty significant cost when you say how much does it cost us to address it, but not a budget impact. So then this new section that I added, and we've touched on this a little bit briefly as we were going through the other sections, but there's been a lot of questions about the different aids that we are possibly going to get. So we aren't eligible for the direct CARES funding because we weren't 500,000 or more in population. There were some other grant programs like the Department of Justice and things like that, but you had to be 50,000 or more in population. So we weren't eligible for those. CDBG funding was based on 50,000 or above. And then there was another CDBG one that was for cities and villages less than 50,000, but were not in an urban county. So we weren't eligible for that either. So there was a lot of things that we weren't eligible for, but there are a couple of things that we are, which is good. So there's that FEMA public assistance, and we talked about, so the 25% would be our responsibility. FEMA would reimburse the 75%. And this would be for things mostly. So the actual supplies in order to address COVID. So not just because it's there, but to actually physically address COVID in your community. The other nice thing about this program is to meet that match. We can also use all of the donated supplies and labor that we've gotten. So for example, Yahara Bay contributed a lot of hand sanitizer for us. So we can use the value of that to help pay for our 25% match. And then there's been a variety of other donations as well. So this is a great option for us. And I would say if we think we're going to exceed our CARES funding, that this would be kind of the second bucket that we would tap into. I think the first bucket would be this routes to recovery local government aid grants. So that's that CARES funding that went from the feds to the state to us. We were allocated $474,000, which is fantastic. The problem, however, is I feel like there's always a catch. The federal rules on the CARES Act funding was pretty restrictive. So it had to be for unbudgeted items and it had to be expenditures. So you couldn't use it for things like lost revenue, which is really where most municipalities are getting hit right now, is in that lost revenue between sales tax and gas tax and income tax and room tax and all those other things. That's where our budgets are really struggling. But this funding cannot backfill that at this point. So this has to be used for the expenditures and unbudgeted at the federal level. Then when it went to the state and the state are giving it to us, they restricted it even more. So it's only a certain handful of categories that we can actually use this money for. And so I pulled out the ones that are applicable to the city. The other ones were more public health related. So it's going to be the emergency operations activities. which will be when we activated the EOC. Purchases of protective equipment, so that's your masks and your gloves and all of that stuff, which is going to be helpful. Cleaning and sanitizing supplies. And they specifically noted that including the elections stuff, so that will be good to get reimbursed for. Sorry. And then FMLA and sick leave for public health and safety employees to take COVID-19 precautions. So that's where I'm hopeful that some of the stuff from above might be eligible for reimbursement through here because of this. There's some debate about whether it's budgeted or not. So we need to get some more clarification there. The other great thing is if we do think we're going to go over that $474,000, we could use that actually as a match for the FEMA money and really make our money go further. So we could take, the $100,000 there and then turn it into $400,000 at the FEMA level, which could be good. That being said, I don't think that under the current rules, I don't think there's any way that we're going to spend $474,000 on the stuff that they're restricting it to. I will bet that we're going to be closer to the 10% of that amount. So there's a group across the state that's working to try to get some more flexibility in that, make it more in line at least with what the federal rules are rather than being so restrictive. But I don't know if that's going to be successful. The other piece of it, which we definitely will spend, is the Wisconsin Elections Commission has a CARES Act grant. So it's the same federal funding, but it's allocated a little bit differently. So they have two pieces. One is going to be actual grant to us, which will be helpful. So we'll get the $200 base grant, plus then $1.10 per registered voter. This is all basically to pay for the postage for absentee ballots for the November election. So that will be a nice amount of money. And I believe Tracy has an update on that for you guys in your council packet for tonight. The other piece, which isn't going to be cash directly to us, but will still be very helpful to us, is that the state is going to hire LTE to process those absentee ballot applications rather than the paper application coming to the city and us having to hire LTE staff and pay overtime to process those. The state's going to do that and pay for that out of the CARES Act. So we're still going to need overtime and LTE to do the actual processing of the ballots, but at least the part of data entry is going to be taken off of the city's plate, and the state will take care of that. So there are some things that would really help the city if they made changes to things in particular to the CARES Act. So I mentioned a little bit about that lost revenue, how we're not able to use that for lost revenue at this point. If they change that, I know there's a lot of pressure to change that at the federal level. I don't know if it'll be successful, but there's at least people talking about it. That would be a huge impact. And really not so much for our direct budget. The bigger thing is we would prefer that the state is able to use their money to backfill their revenue loss, because that means it's less likely that our aid from the state will be affected. So if the state can't use that money to backfill their losses, they're going to have to balance their budget somehow, and most likely that will trickle down to us and pretty significantly affect us as well in 2021. It would also have been good if for those FFCRA benefits we talked about at the beginning that we were required to provide to our employees, non-municipalities were able to get that cost reimbursed from the federal government, but municipalities were specifically excluded from that. So we were required to provide the benefit, but we did not get the reimbursement. So if we were, that would be a benefit to us. And then there's, of course, talk about additional stimulus funding at the federal level. And I don't know how realistic that is to expect anything, but there is conversation about that. And then the last section of this report is the city revenue. So I know we've talked about this the last couple of meetings, so I won't go into it too much. For 2020, honestly, our budget is pretty stable. The downside of property taxes is it doesn't grow with the economy like what sales tax or income tax does. But it is very stable. And so that is helping us out a lot in 2020. The one thing I did change, though, is the intergovernmental revenues. So there's a nuance because the state budget is from July to June, and we obviously are a calendar year budget. So depending on what happens at the state level, they may actually affect and reduce our aid payments for the second half of the year, which would be their next year's budget. Hope that there's been talk that they don't plan to, that they would use that almost as a last resort, but it is possible that they would reduce our state aids for the second half of the year. So I guess my message on all of this is that in general, we're very stable for 2020. I think we make good financial decisions that allow us to have a pretty decent safety net going into the crisis. So we don't need to panic. We don't need to take any extreme measures at this point. I think we can get through 2020 pretty successfully. You know, construction is still going pretty strong, all of that stuff. We are in a really good spot for a lot of those things. But I do worry about 2021, especially on that state aid side of it, because the state is going to have to be able to balance their budget somehow. And then the last piece I include in here, which is also new, is this appendix, because there's a lot of similarities, but also differences between the CARES Act and the FEMA Act funding. So I included this infographic that we got from Dane County that talks about what the CARES Act does and what FEMA does. So just for some additional information, they did a nice job kind of boiling it down to bite-sized pieces. Any questions on the COVID stuff? I know that was a lot.
Do you have questions?
And just thank you for such a detailed report.
Yeah, I would agree. Yes, thank you.
So then I also have in your packet the March and April treasurer's reports. So the big things here is you won't quite see it yet in March, but in April's report in particular, all of our investments that were callable were all called. So that meant that the market was dropping really fast, and the people that we were lending our money to had the option to say, never mind, we don't want to pay you that high rate anymore, and they took that option for obvious reasons. So we are investing now at a much lower rate. You could say even our checking account for March was 1.63, LGIP was 1.14%, which was pretty good for the time. LGIP for May is down to 0.2%. So it's a pretty significant drop there. The one thing we have in our favor is we are laddered. So from an investment standpoint, all the CDs, once they come due, we are reinvesting them at these lower rates now, but it just means that we'll be able to kind of spread out that loss that we're going to take. And then also included in here is the financials. So again, the caveat being that this is all based on the information that's in the accounting records at the time that the reports were pulled. But you can see every account number that we have in the general fund, the budget, and the actual and where we're sitting. So that's there for March and for April. Other than that, for my treasurer's report or my finance director's report, CIP happened last night. And so we've got the committee of the whole meeting coming up in June, where we'll talk more about the financial management plan. And then amendments will be due in July. And then tonight you're doing the budget schedule. So then budget worksheets go out next week. We'll just keep rolling.
One question, Misty, on the treasurer's report, going forward with each of the finance committee meetings, this will be included at your report?
It's a monthly report.
Correct. But
a lot of it depends on timing. So generally it's the second meeting of the month following the end of the month. Mm-hmm. But we make sure that like our bank reconciliation is done and stuff like that before we present this report. Mm-hmm. So sometimes there's a delay.
Yeah, I just hadn't seen it up until this point, and this is great information, at least what I'm accustomed to from elsewhere. So it's very commendable. This is very thorough. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Of course. And I also say that all of the past reports for a rolling 1 year are out on the city's website.
Right.
So they're available for you guys there too if you want them.
That's it?
That is it.
Okay. Thank you, Misty. Any question? No, Gabriela? Okay. So next we move to the detailed review of all checks for $10,000 and above that they were dated May 16, 2020 to May 31st, 2020, totaling $48,301.82. Do we have questions?
Nothing here.
No.
One question for me.
Gabriela has a question.
Hang on, let me just pull it up here. Okay, so for the budget schedule, all the changes from the previous year are the ones that are in red, is that right?
All the
Or is that, oh, sorry, those are public hearings. So, Mike, I'm curious about just like previous budget processes. Is this calendar pretty consistent year to year for budget, or are there significant changes that happen,
Oh, you
in
talk-
how the schedule happens?
What are you talking, what?
Oh, I thought we were talking about the budget schedule,
No.
are we not? Oh,
No.
I'm sorry.
Okay. We are in the, we are
Never
reviewing
mind.
the check for $10,000 and above.
No questions.
No question, okay. So next we move to the detailed review for all checks issued, check number 120879-120896, dated May 16, 2020 to May 31st, totaling $91,982.86. Do we have any question there? Any question?
No, thank you. Nothing, thank you.
No? Okay. Next, we move to the detailed review of ACH payment for $10,000 and above, totaling $226,110 with 64 cents. Do we have a question?
No question.
Nope.
And then we move to the detailed review of all ACH payment dated May 2020, totaling $231,960 with 51 cents. Any question?
No question.
Nope.
Okay, so good. So next we are going to action item number 6A. We are going to have an update for the Fish Hatchery Road construction. I think we have Bill here. Bill? Bill?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Okay.
Misty, I sent Misty a report that she's gonna share on your screens for, the Fish Hatchery Road project. That gives a summary of where we are today. Financially, we're doing, very well. We're pretty young into the project yet. So our construction dollars are not that high yet. Currently, we've had 3 pay applications that have been submitted for $1.5 million. We had another pay estimate request for construction engineering this past month for May, and a couple of business outreach. Cindy Yagis, who's with Economic Development, EDP Partners. Economic Development Partners, who's doing our business outreach along Fish Hatchery Road. There were a couple invoices there. And we still have 2 pending pay requests for our property acquisition. It is a little bit higher than what we had estimated, but when you're dealing with millions of dollars, being this close to, with negotiations to our estimate, was pretty good. The property acquisition, we are planning to sell a portion of the land that we acquired by Pike Drive to adjacent property owners if they're interested in purchasing that. So that will bring that number back within budget again. We did spend a little bit of money out of the contingency for a couple of items that were not in the, that were on the plan, but did not make it onto the bid form. So there was a change order for one of the concrete structures that didn't make it on there, as well as the bus shelter installation, and then some concrete or some insulation for our water main. The property acquisition, as I mentioned, is primarily completed. We've got 2 parcels remaining, and we're finalizing some of the release of easements from the utilities. They just have to sign off that they're releasing their rights to certain easements that they have that we've purchased. So it's just some paperwork that we have to finish up on, and that'll be completed. All right. Our public outreach, we have our city webpage, and the website's noted there where we give updates. We try to get them out there weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, during the construction. I give a business update or a construction update weekly for all construction projects in Fitchburg. So I do that with Fact TV. We do, as I mentioned, the weekly updates. And Cindy Yagi is, she had been going, door to door before COVID, giving out information, but now she's virtually reaching out to the businesses and through telephones to keep them informed of things like, water main shutoffs or driveway changes, intersection, things like that. So she's been an integral part of our team to make sure that we've got information flowing to the businesses. They contact her when they've got some updates on deliveries or employee information that they need to distribute. So we've got a pretty good contact with all the businesses up and down there. It's been working out really well. We have a couple major material procurements that one is coming forward for the street lighting that we have to purchase yet for this area. And the city of Madison, we have a purchase agreement with them for all of the traffic signal equipment that's been purchased so that we have those for installation when it comes time. We did purchase a bus shelter. We'll be purchasing another one this year and then a final one next year for installation along the corridor. Generally, our construction remains on schedule. We've got the concrete north of Greenway Cross completed, and we'll be switching the traffic onto that, completing the south side of that intersection with concrete, and then possibly paving a good section of that with blacktop toward the end of next week, going south from there. We've got curb and gutter, all the utilities in to UW Credit Union, and we're starting to work on the fine points of some street lighting bases and things like that to the north of UW Credit Union, and then to the south, we're finishing up the utilities down to where Traceway Drive or Bowman Drive is being constructed. Bowman Drive water main will be started next week and then completed, and then we'll be looking to close off Post Road toward the end of June, and then opening up Greenway Cross so that we can flip all the traffic over to the new pavement by the middle of July. So that's our update for that project. If you have any questions.
Yes, Gabriela has a question.
Is this report, I didn't see it in the agenda packet. Is this something that is online somewhere that I can download and take a look at it? Or is it possible for you to send it out?
Can you send it to the council? Bill?
Yeah, we can send that to the council. I just didn't have enough time to get it in the packet and on Friday, so I just sent it to Misty right now.
That's fine. I just would love to review it a little bit more or be able to reference back to it.
Sure.
And then my second question is, in terms of the updates on the website, I check the website regularly and I haven't seen anything on the front page. So I'm curious, and I just did a quick search for Fish Hatchery in the search bar, and the page that comes up, it doesn't look like there's been any updates since May 11th.
I was checking today, it's May 8th.
Yeah, it
Like
says the
that?
last weekly updates from May 4 to May 11. So I'm just curious about, are the updates coming somewhere else on the website? Or I'm just confused about how, what's the best place to direct people to find out information?
Sure. That's one of the things I got to work on a little bit better is to get that information out there sooner. It was just, one-man shop here trying to get everything done. So
Oh, for sure.
they did fall by the wayside a little bit, but I'm going to work with our staff to be able to get that information out there in a timely manner.
Great,
Yeah.
that's fine. Yeah, I can imagine, I totally sympathize with a staffing issue. But is that FHR Recon, that's the end of the URL? Is that where they're supposed to go to find the information?
Yes, the reconstruction
Okay.
is for the information. And I don't know how Civic redirects our website or the searches. We've got an issue with that. It keeps sending it to the planning page, but I needed to get it to the construction. So that's something that I'm trying to figure out how to make it go to the right page when people put the search in.
Yeah, you know why? This afternoon I received an email from Cindy from the Fish Hatchery update, and there was a, say, for more information, click here to link to the update. It takes you to the website, and this is what I found out that it takes you to a page where the information is from the beginning of May. So if people go, if they are sending that newsletter and people are linking, clicking the link, they don't have an updated information. This is why,
Yes.
because I say I want to take a look what it's going to affect this weekend or next week because I need to go back to work, and the information was for the first week of May. So this is how I found out. So, yeah.
Yep.
So.
I'll get the updated information up there tonight so that'll be ready.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Yes. Oh, yeah. Gabriela has another one.
Are we turning each other on and off? Okay. Just kind of a point for anyone that's watching right now, I just wanted to say that the information on the Facebook page is up to date, and I'd have to look at and you're doing like you said, you're doing those Fact TV updates, which I assume are running on the public access television on the cable. So people want the most up to date. There definitely is updates on the Facebook page, which is the Fitchburg Transportation Projects is what it's called. And then I did just check on the website, and if you search Fish Hatchery on the website search bar, it'll pop up the page. It's the first search hit. So it will be pretty easy for people to find the page. So yeah, that's just for information for anyone that's out there watching right now. Thanks so much, Bill.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay, any other question? No?
No?
Okay, thank you, Bill. Next, I need a motion to approve resolution R-107-20, adopting the 2021 annual city budget schedule.
Motion to approve.
You need to second.
Second?
You don't need seconds.
I don't need to second?
Second.
Oh, you're already confused with that. Okay. So, any question? Gabriela, you have a question.
Yeah, so we'll go back to
Now
my
you
original
can, now you
question.
can speak.
Yeah, I'm just curious about is this a typical budget schedule, or is this something that changes from year to year for any reason?
So it's generally typical. At the very bottom of the schedule, I actually point out the differences from this schedule versus last year's. So there were a couple of things. Most of them don't affect you guys as much. The one that I did want to point out, though, is number 3. So in the past, we've had 2 days worth of public hearings, or not public hearings, but 2 days worth of department head presentations. So similar to what we did last night for CIP, but every department comes in for budget. We usually do that over 2 nights, but the last few years, it's been 2 nights for an hour to an hour and a half. And I don't know about you guys, but my preference would be just stick it out for 3 hours for one night instead, maybe even 4, and just have it be one night. But so I'm proposing that for you guys, but ultimately it's what you as a council would prefer.
Okay.
But other than that, back to your question, Gabrielle, it's very similar to what we've done in the past.
Is that a question, what we prefer?
So that's for your discussion. So what's in front of you right now has it just one night, but you're welcome to make an amendment to go back to 2 nights. I have that date in there also. I just crossed it off.
I would prefer one night, but with a break halfway between. Do we take breaks here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't typically take breaks. That's
Well, no, there hasn't been.
When the meetings run long, sometimes we take.
Okay, I didn't know if that was standard. I mean, from a private sector, we take breaks. I didn't know from a governmental standpoint, I guess the sector, we do.
Yeah, so.
But I just would like to throw that in as a suggestion.
So when is the meeting? Oh, okay then.
It's like September 29th. Is that the one?
Yep, September 29th, and then September 30th would be that second day if you choose that you want to keep it on 2 nights.
No, I think, well, I have been lately, in the last 2 years, I think we did it in one night, isn't it?
Nope, we've always done it in 2 nights.
But last year too?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't remember.
Not CIP, you might be thinking of CIP. CIP we always do in one night, budget is always in two.
Okay. It depends. Sometimes, we have plenty of questions for the head of the department, and if you can prepare and you have your questions, sometimes, you can ask a lot of questions, and that one can take longer. There are some departments that the budget is very small, they go smooth. But there are some departments where the budget is, they have, they're big budgets, and then there are more questions, and sometimes it take a little bit longer, but I don't know, we can be here 3 or 4 hours at least if we need to allocate. Isn't it?
And if I may, Julia, one
Yeah.
other thing quick. So I'll also say I put this schedule together and this idea last year, and that was all pre-COVID. So knowing that budget also might look different and might be more difficult than other years, I don't know if that plays into the conversation too.
Can we be flexible and say, let's go for one night, and then if we, no?
Unfortunately, no, because under open meetings law, you have to post the agenda 24
yes,
hours in
true.
advance. So if you don't decide until 10 o'clock one night that you want to go to the next night, that's not 24 hours. So what you could do is have one night and then have it maybe on on Thursday be your alternate day. That would give me time to post it.
Okay, we
But
can do that.
24 hours is like the minimum. Generally, you want to have 72 hours of an agenda posted. The other option is I could post it for 2 nights, and then if you don't need it, we just cancel the meeting.
Yeah.
I could do-
Yeah, I almost prefer to keep 2 on the schedule just in case. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm a person with a lot of questions, so. And
Yeah,
based on how
so-
CIP went last night, I was like, oh, I don't know.
Let's have it for two nights, and then if we need, we'll see.
So then what we need is someone to who was it that motion to approve the schedule?
That was me, yeah.
Was you? Excellent. So then if you do want to make it 2 nights, you need to either do a friendly amendment or have somebody do an amendment to the resolution to return it to 2 nights.
Okay, I'll do a friendly amendment to amend the schedule to add the second night of Finance Committee presentations back into the schedule, and that's September 30th, the meeting on September 30th.
Perfect.
Do I need the precise wording, or is it just the concept and we'll update it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all those in favor of approving that friendly amendment, say aye.
Aye.
The friendly amendment passed. Do I need to do another one? No, I'm fine. Okay.
No, we need to pass.
Well,
Now you need to do the original motion.
So now I need a motion to approve resolution R-107-20.
so we have the motion to approve already.
All
We just need to
all those in favor say
vote on
aye.
it. Or if there's more discussion.
Aye.
Aye.
Nays, the motion carries. Okay, we're done. Oh, you tell me that I need to tell you who? I forgot that, Misty, because you...
Sometimes I have a hard time hearing.
Okay,
But-
sorry.
We're good. It's
Okay, so
we
we
have-
approve both. Okay, so because it's 7/28, and this is our 2 direct referral, do you want to send this directly to council?
They're pretty straightforward. I think, we can go over a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So I need a motion to approve resolution R-1120-20, resolution authorizing award of contract for the Lazy Road CTH-MM intersection signalization.
Motion to approve resolution R-112-20.
Okay, so what is this, bud?
So does this motion include the amendment as proposed?
It does not currently.
Okay,
Which one?
so we're going to have to add that proposed amendment,
From Public Works?
the Finance Committee.
Yeah,
Oh,
from
yeah,
public.
yeah. Ah, yeah, I know what's it.
Yeah. So ultimately, Julia, if you don't mind, so there were 2 things that were missing from the resolution. One was an error. The dollar amount listed was the engineer's estimate instead of the contract. Public Works did catch that and amended their resolution. So we'd like you to make that change before it gets to council as well. The other piece is a budget amendment that's needed to reflect the additional costs from the other contributors to the project. The language is in your packet as what the staff's recommendation would be. So if you're so inclined, we would need a motion to approve as recommended by staff, or as amended by staff.
Okay, so my question is, so we are short a couple of $100,000. From where is money coming?
Yep, so the developer will pay $129,000 more. The county will pay $170,000 more.
Okay.
And then there's $16,000 short on the city portion.
Okay.
And that $16,000 is proposed to come out of the sidewalk project because they haven't had, they have looked at that and they don't have as much sidewalk project as they expected. So that's coming in under budget. So you'd like to shift that into this project to be able to still continue.
Any question?
I'll make a motion to approve as amended by staff.
All those in favor?
Wait, can I ask one more question?
Okay.
though? How common is it to do those small adjustments to the CIP? Is that like a pretty typical tool that you use to like move money from a place that's not fully used to somewhere that needs some extra money?
We seem to be doing it a lot more lately. Usually things come in less than what we estimate, but costs
Okay.
are coming in higher for who knows what reason. So lately we've had to do that, either not doing another project so we could continue with one, or if for some reason, like in this case, a project is much less and we can use that money to continue.
And is this considered a budget amendment then, or is because it's been budgeted somewhere else? Okay, so we have to
It's a
pass
budget
this as a
amendment.
budget amendment on
Yeah.
the council. Okay.
And so then it needs a 2/3 vote because it's a budget amendment. And then I also have to publish it in the paper to let the public know that we're doing this budget amendment.
All those in favor, resolution R-112-20 as amended with the staff recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
So Julio, we're voting on the amendment, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then you have to do a vote on the motion.
And next, I need approval, I need approval of resolution, the original, R-1112-20.
I thought I approved.
Yeah,
The
well,
motion
so we
stands
need,
from
we need
before.
to, is it similar to the last one?
Yeah,
Motion
the
to-
motion was already made, so just a
Yeah,
vote.
the vote, yes, I'm
Yes.
waiting for the vote.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. Okay. So next, I need approval of resolution R-113-20, resolution authorizing an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Madison for traffic signal installation and maintenance.
Oh, motion to approve.
Okay, do we have any change here?
Misty, do you want me to take this one, or?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so this is just, the city of Madison does all of our signal installations and maintenance. So this is a new signal location, so it's no different than any of the other signals in the city. They'll install them, they'll maintain them. If lights burn out or if it gets hit by a vehicle or something, they take care of that.
Any question?
Nothing.
None for me.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays, the motion carried. Next, our announcement. Under announcement, we have our next meeting is going to be June 23rd, 2020, and I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Nays, the meeting is adjourned at 7:34.